My name is Janet. I'm 28 years old. 2 days after $9,000 vanished from our family boutique, my sister-in-law looked my parents dead in the eyes and said, "She bought a new car last month. Ask her where the money really came from." I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself, because my brother was already opening his laptop and none of us knew he'd been watching her for 6 weeks. Our family boutique had always been a place of trust, until $9,000 disappeared. My brother Kenneth knew exactly where to look, because he'd quietly installed cameras after noticing small cash discrepancies. Now, at that family meeting, he was about to project the evidence that would flip every accusation on its head and expose the thief no one saw coming. I grew up in that boutique. My parents opened it in 1994, a small women's clothing store on Main Street. They poured their life savings into it. By the time I could walk, I was folding sweaters. By high school, I was working the register. My brother Kenneth started when he was 16, doing inventory in the back. We grew up together in those aisles. The store wasn't just a business, it was the center of our family. When our father started having back problems, Kenneth took over the books. I ran the sales floor. It was a partnership built on years of unspoken trust. Customers used to say they could feel the warmth the moment they walked in. That was before Pamela. Pamela came into Kenneth's life about 3 years before the money went missing. She was polished, confident, the kind of woman who commands a room. Kenneth fell for her instantly. They got married in a small ceremony, and soon after, Pamela started helping out at the store. At first it was just a few hours here and there, covering a shift, organizing the back office. But gradually she took on more. She insisted she could handle the closing shifts alone, arguing that Kenneth was exhausted from doing everything. I didn't object because I believed family should help family. That was my mistake. The dynamic shifted almost imperceptibly. Pamela would make little comments about how much time Kenneth and I spent together. She'd remark on my purchases, my car, my life choices. I shrugged it off as newlywed insecurity. But looking back, she was already building a narrative in her head, one where I was the rival she needed to eliminate. The $9,000 vanished over the course of 6 weeks. Small amounts at first, $50, $100, not enough to trigger immediate alarm. Kenneth noticed the numbers weren't adding up during his end-of-month reconciliation. He double-checked the receipts, the deposits, the safe logs. Then he realized the pattern. Every discrepancy happened on nights Pamela closed alone. He didn't tell anyone, not even me. Instead, he quietly ordered 3 small night vision cameras and installed them inside the main light fixtures after hours. He told me later he hoped he was wrong. He needed to be sure before he blew up his marriage. Then came the morning my parents called the family meeting. My father's voice was heavy. "There's money missing. We're all meeting at the house tonight." I could hear the accusation before anyone spoke. I drove over with a knot in my stomach, expecting questions. What I didn't expect was Pamela, standing in my parents' living room, looking them in the eye and saying, "Janet just bought a new car. She's never had that kind of cash before. You do the math." I had worked overtime, skipped vacations, saved for a year. The car was a used Honda, nothing fancy. But Pamela made it sound like I'd walked onto the lot with a briefcase of stolen bills. I sat there taking slow breaths and told my parents the truth. I hadn't touched the money. I offered to show my bank statements, my loan documents, anything they wanted. My parents were silent. My mother looked at Kenneth. Kenneth hadn't said a word. He was just sitting there, laptop closed on the coffee table, expression unreadable. The tension in the room felt like a rubber band pulled to its limit. Then he opened the computer. His voice was calm. "Mom, Dad, before anyone says another word, I need to show you something." He turned the screen toward us and I saw the media player queued up. I didn't know what he had. Neither did Pamela. She laughed, that nervous, sharp laugh people use when they're about to fall off a cliff, and said, "What is this, a home movie?" Kenneth didn't smile. He just hit play. And the first clip started rolling. The first clip showed Pamela at the register. The timestamp read October 14th, 3 weeks earlier. She glanced over both shoulders, then slid a stack of 20s directly into her purse. The footage was crystal clear. You could see her wedding ring catch the light as she folded the bills and tucked them away. She closed the drawer and turned to help the next customer as if nothing had happened. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father didn't move, didn't blink. Pamela stared at the screen. Her voice came out thin. "That's not me. That could be anyone." Kenneth said nothing. He clicked the second clip. October 18th. Same register, same purse. This time she counted the bills first, $350, before slipping them into a side zipper. She even smiled at a customer walking past while the cash was still in her hand. The casualness of it was what broke something in my chest. This wasn't desperation. This was routine. A third clip. October 22nd. She came in early for a closing shift, went straight to the back office, and opened the deposit bag that had been prepared for the bank. She removed a stack of 50s and 100s, replaced the bag in the safe, and left. The total from that single clip alone was nearly $2,000. My mother's voice cracked. Pamela, what is this? Pamela's face had gone from white to red. She stood up. This is a setup. Kenneth, you've been filming me without my consent. That's illegal. You can't use this. Kenneth didn't raise his voice. He said, I own the store. The cameras are inside my own business. And right now the footage shows you stealing from my family. He clicked the fourth clip, then the fifth, then the sixth. Each timestamp was a different night, a different amount, the same deliberate motion of cash leaving our register and entering her purse. By the seventh clip, my father's jaw was set like concrete. He looked at Kenneth and said, How long have you known? Kenneth answered without hesitation. 6 weeks. I noticed the first missing deposit 3 months ago. $50 here, 80 there. I thought it was an accounting error. Then the amounts grew. The only common thread was Pamela's shifts, so I installed the cameras and waited. I wanted to be wrong. I prayed I was wrong. Pamela's strategy shifted. She turned to my parents, tears suddenly streaming. I was going to pay it back. I swear. I got in over my head with some credit card debt, and I was embarrassed to tell Kenneth. I thought I could fix it before anyone noticed. Her voice had that practiced quiver that makes you want to believe someone even when every fact says otherwise. My mother looked at her and said, $9,000, Pamela, you didn't borrow a 20 for lunch, you emptied our deposit bags. Pamela shook her head. 9,000? No, it wasn't that much. Janet must have taken some too. I saw her closing alone plenty of times. Why aren't we watching footage of her? That was the moment Kenneth had been waiting for. He clicked the final clip, timestamped 3 days before the meeting. The camera angle was from the back office, the one place Pamela didn't know about yet. She was on her phone, packing, her voice caught clearly by the microphone hidden in the smoke detector. I told you I'll have the rest by the end of the week. Yeah, the full 10, just stop calling me. No, she has no idea. As far as this family knows, Janet's the one with the money problems. She laughed. By the time I'm done, they'll fire her and beg me to run the store. The room went dead silent. Not the silence of shock. The silence of a line being crossed that can never be uncrossed. Pamela's face crumpled into something real for the first time, not tears of regret. The panic of someone who just heard their own words played back in a room full of people they'd been trying to destroy. My father stood up slowly. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 30 years of building something from nothing. You tried to ruin my daughter, he said. You stole from our family and you did it smiling. Pamela looked at Kenneth. There was no pleading left in her eyes, just a cold calculation, a search for any exit that still existed. She found none. Kenneth closed the laptop. He said, I've already filed a police report. They have copies of all 9 clips. The detective is waiting outside. He gestured toward the front door. You have 2 choices, walk out and talk to them or wait here while they come in. The room held its breath. We were about to find out which version of Pamela would walk out that door, and whether the family my parents spent a lifetime building would survive the damage she had already done. Pamela didn't walk out. She froze. Her eyes scanned the room like a trapped animal, and for a single second I saw something I had never seen in her before, genuine fear. Not fear of consequences, fear of being seen. The mask she had worn for 3 years cracked open. Then she did what cornered people do, she attacked. Kenneth, you're going to ruin your own marriage over your sister, her voice pitched higher. You think this looks good for either of you, a family business spying on employees. I'll sue you for invasion of privacy. I'll call the labor board. Everyone in town will know this store is run by paranoid lunatics. She turned to my mother. You think customers want to shop somewhere that films its own family? My mother, who I had never once heard curse, looked at Pamela and said, Get out. Pamela didn't move. She squared her shoulders. I'm not going anywhere. I'm Kenneth's wife. I have rights. This is my home too. Kenneth stood up then, slowly, the way you stand when you're trying not to break something. That house is in my name, he said. The car is in my name. The bank accounts you emptied are in my family's name. The only thing you have rights to right now is a phone call from a holding cell. He opened the front door. The detective was a man named Marcus Webb. He had worked white-collar theft in the county for 15 years. He had the calm, unhurried manner of someone who had already seen the footage, already read the statements, and was simply waiting for the performance to end. He stepped inside, nodded to my parents, and looked at Pamela. Ma'am, I think we need to have a conversation. She tried one last play. Her voice dropped, tears real this time but for the wrong reasons. I was going to put it all back, I swear, I made some bad choices. A loan shark in the city, he threatened me, he said he'd hurt Kenneth if I didn't pay, you don't understand what I've been going through. She reached for Kenneth's arm, he pulled away. What's the name of the loan shark, he asked, she blinked. What? The name, you've been paying him for months, you must know his name. Silence. She didn't have an answer because she had never planned to need one. Detective Webb sat down at the dining table. He pulled a folder from his bag. Inside were printouts of the 9 clips, bank deposit records, and a summary Kenneth had prepared weeks earlier. But there was also something I hadn't seen before. A 10th document. Kenneth saw my eyes land on it and nodded. I found that yesterday, he said. I was going to tell you after the meeting. The document was a series of cash withdrawals from my parents' personal savings account. Small amounts, each disguised as a store expense. $500 here, $700 there. The total was staggering. The money Pamela took didn't stop at $9,000 from the register. Over 18 months, she had siphoned nearly $22,000 from the family. The account my parents had set aside for retirement, for emergencies, for the store's future expansion. She had been dipping into it the whole time she was lecturing me about my car payment. Detective Webb read her the Miranda warning. Not in a dramatic television way, just a tired, practiced recitation. She has the right to remain silent. Anything she says can be used against her. She has the right to an attorney. He asked if she understood. She nodded, face blank. For the first time all evening, Pamela had nothing to say. My father spoke. His voice was heavy but steady. I want to know why. Our family welcomed you. We gave you a job, a home, a place at the table. Pamela looked at him. The act was gone. What was left was something raw and ugly. Because Janet had everything, she said. She had your trust, she had the store, she had Kenneth's attention. I walked into this family and I was always second. Everything I did was compared to her, so I decided to take what I deserved. That was the real confession, not the theft, not the money, the motivation. She had tried to destroy me because I existed, because my parents trusted me with their business, because my brother and I shared a bond she couldn't replicate and couldn't stand. Detective Webb closed his folder. I have enough to make an arrest tonight, he said. That's one path. The other path is you sit down right now and sign a full confession, agree to restitution with interest, and the family declines to press charges. That offer expires in 5 minutes. Pamela's lawyer, who she called from the dining room, arrived 30 minutes later. A tired-looking man in a rumpled suit who clearly hadn't expected to spend his evening negotiating his client's survival. By the time the clock hit 10, the confession was signed. $22,000, plus 15% interest, payable within 1 year. A no-contact order. Surrender of all keys, passwords, and access to the store. And a clause I insisted on, a written apology to be read aloud in front of the same family she tried to tear apart. She read it through gritted teeth, but she read it. The words were hollow. It didn't matter. What mattered was the paper in my father's hands, the legal weight of it, the fact that for the first time in 3 years the truth was on the record. Pamela left with the lawyer, not with handcuffs, but knowing she had lost everything. She was banned from the store, banned from the house. Banned from our lives. And then Kenneth stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out a slim manila envelope. He had been carrying it in his briefcase since the morning. Inside were divorce papers. He had signed them before the meeting even began. I filed this afternoon, he said. It's already in the system. There's no going back. The room exhaled. My mother started to cry, not from sadness. From relief so deep it had nowhere else to go. My father put his hand on Kenneth's shoulder and said nothing. Some sentences don't need words. We sat there until midnight, the 4 of us, in the living room my parents had built 30 years ago, the business they had built together still standing, damaged but whole. And then we started talking about what came next. The weeks after that night moved slowly. At first, the store felt hollow. Every time the front bell chimed, I half expected Pamela to walk in with that brittle smile and a coffee for no one but herself. But she didn't. The no-contact order held. Her attorney handled the first restitution payment, a cashier's check for $2,000 delivered to my parents' mailbox with a typed note that said nothing. No apology, no admission, just a transaction. Kenneth moved through those early days like a man learning to walk again. He filed the divorce papers the morning after the meeting, and the process was mercifully fast. No children, no shared property that wasn't already documented, no defense she could mount that wouldn't require explaining the footage. He stayed at my parents' house for 6 weeks while his home sat empty, then eventually sold it. Too many memories in the walls, he said. Too many echoes of a voice he had once trusted. I drove with him to the closing. He handed over the keys without looking back. Pamela made 3 restitution payments. The first was on time. The second was a week late. The third never came. She had moved out of state, we learned later, to Arizona, where she apparently told a new employer a carefully edited version of her departure from Massachusetts. She never paid the remaining balance. My parents chose not to pursue it, not because they forgave her, but because the cost of chasing her across the country, financially and emotionally, was a debt none of us wanted to carry. She was gone, that was worth more than the money. The store, however, needed more than just her absence. The $22,000 she stole had come from accounts we couldn't easily replenish. We had to make hard choices. We cut inventory orders, renegotiated with suppliers, and ran a leaner operation for a full fiscal quarter. My father, who had been talking about retirement for years, delayed his plans. My mother took extra shifts covering the register. And Kenneth threw himself into the financial reconstruction with the same quiet intensity he had used to build the case against his wife. He audited every account, rebuilt every spreadsheet, and installed a transparent accounting system that made it impossible for anyone, family or not, to move money without multiple eyes on it. But here's the part that surprised me. The customers came back stronger. Word travels in a small town. People heard what happened, not through gossip but through the quiet network of family businesses that support each other. The florist next door sent us a bouquet with a note that said, "Welcome back." The cafe down the street started sending over customers with a wink and a promise. One week, a woman I'd never met walked in, bought $300 in clothing, and told me at the counter, "My sister-in-law tried the same thing with our restaurant. You'll get through this." I held it together until she left, then cried in the back room for 5 full minutes. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming proof that we were not alone. That was the turning point, not the diagnosis of the damage but the rebuilding of trust. Kenneth and I started having weekly meetings, just the two of us, in the back office where we had once found the discrepancies. We talked about inventory and marketing and eventually about bigger things. He said, "You've been running the sales floor for 6 years. You know this business better than anyone. Why don't you have a real stake in it?" I didn't have an answer, so I started looking at business programs. I enrolled in a business administration degree the following fall, taking night classes at the state university while working full-time at the store. It took me 3 years to finish, longer than I expected, but every class felt like putting another brick into a foundation that was finally mine. I applied what I learned in real time. I redesigned the inventory system to reduce waste. I built a social media presence that brought in customers from 3 towns over. I launched a loyalty program that tripled repeat visits within 6 months. By the time I graduated, the store's revenue had not just recovered, it had doubled. My parents officially handed me the keys on my 30th birthday. Not a symbolic gesture, a legal transfer. Kenneth stayed on as financial advisor but stepped back from day-to-day operations. He had started dadding again, a quiet woman who ran a bookstore 2 towns away, and he deserved a life that wasn't defined by what had been stolen from him. I hired 2 new employees, both women who had left toxic family businesses of their own, and we built something different. A place where trust wasn't assumed but proven. Where cameras stayed in the fixtures not as a secret weapon, but as a quiet reminder that anyone who worked here answered to the same standard. There's one more detail I haven't told you. A year after Pamela disappeared, Kenneth received a letter forwarded from her last known address. She had filed for bankruptcy in Arizona. Among the listed debts was a credit card she had opened in Kenneth's name 2 years before the theft was ever discovered. He had never known it existed. The balance was small by then, a few $100s she had never paid, but it explained something I had always wondered about. She hadn't just stolen from the store. She had been building a parallel financial life, a hidden scaffolding of small deceptions from the moment she joined our family. The $9,000 was just the one we caught. We paid off the card and closed it. It felt like the final stitch in a wound that had finally stopped bleeding. Today, the boutique is thriving. Our family is smaller but stronger. And I learned something I never expected: being framed didn't break me. It showed me exactly what I was capable of building once the people who wanted me to fail were no longer in the room. There's a certain kind of betrayal that only happens inside a family. It cuts deeper because the defenses are down. In a corporate job, you expect politics. In a family business, you expect loyalty. Pamela knew that difference and she weaponized it. But the very thing she counted on, our silence, our willingness to absorb damage quietly, was ultimately what undid her. Kenneth didn't scream. He didn't confront. He watched, documented, and waited until the truth was unassailable. There is a lesson in that, and it isn't just about cameras. Sometimes the people who seem most aggrieved, most eager to point fingers, are the ones whose hands are already dirty. And sometimes the person sitting silently at the table, the one you've been told not to trust, is carrying the proof that will set everything right. The question this story leaves behind isn't whether Pamela will ever pay back the rest of the money. She won't. The question is what you do when someone you love turns out to be someone you never knew. Kenneth answered with evidence and divorce papers. I answered by taking the business and building it into something no thief could take away. Our parents answered by letting go of the fantasy that forgiveness always means reconciliation. Sometimes it means closing the door and locking it. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, or watched someone you trusted quietly sabotage your life, you know how isolating that feels. Stories like this remind us we're not alone. If it resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe. It helps more people find these stories. And if you have your own experience with family betrayal, drop it in the comments. I read them. Until next time, take care of the people who guard your back, and never stop building something they can't steal.